Alright guys, just doing a slightly longer video overview of what went right and what went wrong and how it could have been better and stuff like that. If you'll notice, the first thing you notice probably is this external bracket where the blocks connect. I started out with that tree pan idea, and it turns out that actually works, but the leak was coming from somewhere else. It confused me. When I was drilling the holes to mount this block to the main block valve, one of the 832s went in, and not even visibly, I'm talking, a thousandth of an inch hole, went into the side of the threads inside the valve and caused a leak. So the leak was coming out here. I assumed it was the tree panning deal, redid everything, and I did seal that hole later on. But because of that, I couldn't use one of the bolt holes to secure the block. So, it just became a nightmare, and that's how I ended up with these two brackets and, 5/16 steel rods securing the block, which no problem, zero leaks, submerged. And the thing is, I couldn't have finished the gun, leaking. I wasn't going to start, painting and sanding and chamfering with a leaking gun. There was no point. One thing that came out really good was this trigger assembly. If I take out these four screws, 1, 2, 3, and 4, if I pop those out, this whole block comes out at once with the trigger. I mean, with the pistol grip attached and everything. The trigger stays in place. No springs go flying out. The whole thing just comes off. I stumbled upon this design, as I was going, but it really makes life easy as far as disassembly and reassembly. It looks all right. The trigger is probably about 1 pound, if that. So this was the best. This was the most successful portion of the build, just the trigger pistol grip assembly area. The stock, not much interesting there. I mean, this is a QB78, sawed down, the back of the QB, sanded the inside plastic guide, and then put a plate in there and bolted it up to this rod, which is, the lower section of the stock. I actually have holes pre-drilled for a Picatinny rail up here. I just, my hands are dirty, so I don't want to handle it too much, but I just haven't, see those two holes right there? Those are already tapped for a Picatinny rail. I just haven't gotten around to mounting anything or printing it. What else? The power was there. I think it had 305 foot-pounds, so I was anticipating something over 200, maybe less than 300. So, it was in that vicinity of what I thought I would get, with the length of the barrel, the pressure being used, and the valve geometry. Could something with this length barrel do way better? Of course, yeah. You could have ideal flow with with like a QEV or a spool valve. Look at the Umarex hammer. They're pushing 700 foot-pounds. I don't think the barrel is that long, especially on the new version. And it's because the plenum literally dumps full bore right into the back of the pellet. So it's an ideal circumstance. For perspective, this has double the barrel, but it barely doubles the FPE of the pistol build. So 12-inch versus 24, 152 foot-pounds versus 305. And that's actually not supposed to be a symmetrical equation right there. With the double the barrel, I should be at 3 times the foot-pounds or something. But this has a lot more restrictions, and it has, flow restrictions, and it has a conventional hammer valve as opposed to that spool system, which is a full bore dump of air at once, which is incredible, but you can't do it as a repeater or anything like that, or at least none that I've seen. QEV can be done as a repeater, like the Umarex hammer, and I've seen one or two builds done that way. So yeah, this block-to-block connection was a bad idea probably because it was the source of all the troubles. Now the thing will hold 3,000 psi overnight, and you know, but because of that block and the connection system and everything else, I had to shorten the side lever, which wasn't the end of the world. It's still easy to charge the gun. What else? So yeah, overall, you know, this plate right here, this is actually a reinforcement plate. You know, it steps up a 1/4 inch right there. Overall, the way to do it would have been to just start out with, and this is a 2 inch block, you know, the main block is 2 inches. Start out with a 3 inch block, then, you know, your drop down for your tank and everything wouldn't even be a drop down. It would just be part of the block because now this section is 3 inches. So you'd have the block, you'd have your valve sealed barrel, but this would all be one piece. You'd have no leaks. It would be, you know, straight to the point. Not only that, you'd have more, you know, where you needed them, you'd have more anchoring options. For example, here, you know, the hammer was 935 thousandths. Well, if you're trying to anchor this to the block, you know, I'm really using the radius of the wall to mount this to the block. If it was 1.5 inches wide or taller, I'd have, you know, maybe I'd have 1/2 inch below the hammer or 3/4 or even 1 inch below the hammer to, you know, to mount stuff. So it was just, you know, the block is just completely hogged out. It probably weighs a third or a quarter of what it did originally, because I was working with so little room that I had to squeeze all these mechanics into. So, you know, right there, I started out as a, you know, at a disadvantage with this build. Now that it's reliable, I mean, I kind of like it. It's not something I'm going to be plinking in the backyard with because, you know, the cops would be here in 5 minutes. I guess I could put a huge LDC on it or whatever and take it outside occasionally. What else? I do like the fact that the gauge is, you know, actually facing the user. That's kind of a rare feature if you have a couple PCPs laying around. Generally, the gauge is either facing to the side or it's actually facing the front. So, you know, the squirrel can see your gauge, but you actually can't. What else? Yeah, with the constraints, you know, being not wide enough and not tall enough a block to start, I had to do some interesting things like, you know, the angled fill port or whatever, which worked out fine, but you know, it's a little tricky and I probably don't have the depth I would like to have if there was room, you know, to go in straight perpendicular. But that's about it. I mean, it was a mixed bag. I could call it a success because, you know, it did have the power that I was anticipating. I could call it a failure because most of my time with it was spent, you know, correcting leaks and finally adding this contraption, which is an eyesore. But you know, it was entertaining throughout. You know, it was a little aggravating, but it was definitely entertaining throughout. And I learned something, especially with this you know trigger block and how it is all one piece and you know could be swapped over to another gun almost instantly. So you know, it's kind of like the paintball trigger from the 9mm build. That could be pretty much swapped onto anything. I don't know what I'm gonna do next. Yeah, I haven't even thought about it because I've been so wrapped up in this thing. I might do more chrono videos of this, I'm not sure. But anyway, thanks for sticking around and watching me, you know, tinker and make mistakes and do some stuff right. And, you know, it's all a learning curve, I guess. Anyway, more to come. Stay tuned.